Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hire Moment Mastermind. I'm Shira Lotzar. I'm a recruiter and a career coach and delighted to host our Hire Moment Mastermind meetings every Friday. I'm joined today by Vern Schellinger, who's a networking expert, and Rick Webb, who is a government contractor recruiter, and just both terrific advisors to our group. So we're going to keep things, again, very open, very loose right now, just to kind of keep things, have an open Q&A. But before we get going, would like to invite Elena Shapina to the stage. She just got a job. And Elena, would you like to share a little bit about your job search journey?
Sure, absolutely, Shira. Thank you. Thank you for opening the platform. Yes, I'm very excited that I just accepted an offer from a community bank. And it is a fantastic opportunity tapping into each and every skill set that I have, each and every job previously that I had. So it is truly exciting opportunity. And I want to thank Shira and her community that it has been so supportive and so encouraging. And even during the very last stage of talking to the organization, I reached out to Shira and I was very surprised. She picked up the phone and called me on Saturday to provide last minute advice and coaching as I was making a decision whether to accept the position or not. So I would like to share a couple of out of my experience, I want to share a couple of encouraging notes. First of all, I took a sabbatical and I was out of work altogether for approximately a year and a half. That has never came up as an issue. Questions were never asked. It is, so I just want to encourage people who have been in the process for a period of time that your job is out there. And I want to encourage you to be kind to yourself, to take time to rest, to be plugged in into your community, and also to believe in yourself. And because I truly believe you will that as we go after what is true to our heart, our opportunity finds us. So thank you, Shira, for all of the support. I'm very excited, and I'll be starting my new position on Monday.
We are so delighted for you. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
We thank God for your opportunity. That's wonderful. That's great. All right. So again, we have a small crowd today, so we'd like to just open this up for questions. Who has got a question they'd like to kick off with?
I have a question, Shira. This is Caroline. I have my first opportunity to ever work with a headhunter firm. I've been selected for a confidential position consideration, I guess. Do you have any pointers on the best way to interact with such an entity?
It's interesting. Working with headhunters is similar, but not exactly, to working with a corporate recruiter, right? So Rick, for example, is a corporate recruiter, meaning that he works for the company. The difference with a headhunter is that we work for many companies, right? So we're a third party. One of the big differences is that because we're not the employer, right? We're not the hiring manager. You can be a little bit more hair down with us, if you will, right? You can share with us, and we hope that you will be transparent in terms of your needs and your wants, what's important to you, both in the role, culture, comp, everything. If you're pending with other opportunities, we really need to know that because we need to be able to advocate for you, right? If we don't know, we can't advocate, especially if you are pending with other opportunities that are going to be wrapping up quickly, right? We need to be able to go to the employer and say, look, if you're interested in Caroline, we may need to hurry things up, that kind of thing. So you want to trust the headhunter that you're working with and be, again, as transparent as possible. And rely on them. The other thing too is rely on them for background information. Different headhunters have different approaches, different levels of depth that they go into with their search process. I happen to be one of those that goes really in depth, and so I know a lot of information. Some people have less information for whatever reason. It's just different style, approach, all kinds of things. So don't assume they have all the backstory, but some of them might. And so it's definitely up to you to ask the good questions of them, to say, what do you know, right? What can you tell me? But don't just say it that way, right? You ask very strategic questions of them. And then they will share whatever they can. And it's okay to stump them. It really is. And for recruiters in general, Because if it's a question that's thoughtful enough that we don't know, we're very impressed that you asked the question that stumped us, right? And that is something that you can certainly ask the employer, but it helps us to hear how you think, if that makes sense, right? So don't hold back. Don't just kind of have your hands in your lap. You definitely want to be proactive. You want to be thoughtful. You want to be strategic. You want to ask questions of them as much as they're asking questions of you. Just really engage, because we have a lot of candidates that we go through, right? And we're looking for the ones that impress us, because we can only put forward a small slate. And so you want to make sure that you are really just on it and not just kind of sitting in a back position saying QA, QA. No, it's QA, 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 like a ping pong game. And the more you do that, the more we're going to feel like, you're really on the ball, and you've thought about this role and you've researched it and you have the strategic questions, same thing you would do in any interview, but we're listening with a slightly different lens, right? Because we have so many candidates, we got to narrow it. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. Thank you. I just didn't know if there was any special, I hate to say angle, but approach I should employ to make sure that I make it to the pool that they recommend.
It's going to be like with any recruiter, right?
Okay.
It's always a narrowing process.
Right.
I would just say that the other thing you should keep in mind is that because headhunters are paid a fee, a decent sized fee to do the searching, you would consider them talent scouts of a sort. Okay. For shaking your head because she used to work for a search firm. And so they're held to even a higher standard, I would say, than a traditional recruiter sometimes. I mean, not to say we're all looking for great people, don't get me wrong, like the standard's the same, but a higher standard in the sense that the employer is saying, look, if we're paying you this hefty fee, we really want a special person, right? And they're expecting that headhunter to do their vetting properly. So just keep that in mind, that's, and remember, they work for the employer, they don't work for you, right? They're not representing you. I mean, they're not, in fact, there's a common misconception in the market. I hear this all the time. Like if I had a nickel, right? Where people will say, oh, you should go work with a headhunter. You don't work with it. The employer works with the headhunter. Right? You'll get presented to the client, right? But they don't work for you. So just keep that in mind, that is ultimately their first relationship. And yet a really good one is going to absolutely care about you, care about what you want, care about what you need, ask you great questions about what's a good fit for you. And hopefully they're making a marriage, not just a placement. So take ownership of your own needs, and really go to them and say, I'm looking for X, Y, Z, all of the different categories, so that they can help to make sure it's the right fit, not just that you're qualified, but that they're going to be a good fit for you. So ask the questions that you need as quickly as you can to make sure that you're vetting the opportunity, not just them vetting you.
Sure.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
A couple of other points with headhunters, executive search firms, and I've worked with a lot of them in my career. And so Carolyn and anybody else, when you're involved with, someone who's an executive recruiter, I agree with everything that Shira said, but I also know, based on my personal experience, there are executive search firms that are better, or individuals who are better than others. And I've actually seen some unprofessional behavior on executive recruiters' parts. So just use your own judgment as you're working with them. And as Shira said, if it's a great, really professional executive recruiter, they will respect you, they'll listen to you, they will become your advocate. On the other hand, while they may become your advocate, you may not fit exactly what the company is looking for. And again, as Shira said, they're working for the company. They're getting paid, by the company. But the other thing to remember, if you've developed a really good relationship and you feel that you've made a really positive impression on them, they will remember you, because there may be another search 3 months from now where you would be the ideal candidate.
Right.
So put a lot of energy and effort into making your best impression with an executive.
Absolutely.
Recruiter.
And that means dressing professionally. That means sending them a thank you note. It means treating them like you would a regular hiring manager.
Yeah.
Rick?
I have one quick comment. Don't pay any executive search firm up front. So if they're asking you for money up front, that's probably not one of those reputable.
They shouldn't be asking you for money, period.
period.
Yeah, do it.
There are, I've seen some like that.
Yeah,
So again, another example of there's unprofessional, behavior out there and everything else. So
Yeah. So, and the other thing too is you will, how do I put this? While professionalism can cut across the board in terms of, for all kinds of reasons, those who do retained search, meaning where it's an exclusive relationship with the employer and the employer is paying them a fee, right, throughout the period, oftentimes they have fewer searches on their desk. They can be more dedicated to the opportunity, and you might find the relationship a little richer. Those who are working on what we call contingency search, meaning they're not paid until the placement is done, they have to work on a volume of searches. And they typically cannot do the deep dive into the employer. They typically cannot have that kind of deep relationship that you would expect or want, right? In general, there's always exceptions to that rule for sure, but that's just kind of the nature of the business model.
yeah, and I would say that's really important, what Shira just said, to understand whether they are retained or they are, that's a question you can ask them. Are you a retained search firm or a contingent search firm? So
Well, fortunately, I do know they're retained. It's Corn
Okay.
Ferry.
Oh,
Oh, okay. Well, that's one of the biggest ones.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. And of course, there's different recruiters, everybody's got a different personality and a different style. Hopefully they will be, again, that they will care about what you want, right? And not try to force fit you into anything. That can happen, unfortunately. I'm not saying them in particular. In fact, the name on the door doesn't really matter, whether it's Corn Ferry or a boutique firm like mine or whatever, Joe Blow's search firm, it doesn't matter. It's the recruiter. That's the relationship, not the name on the door.
Yeah.
Well, so far my interactions have been pleasant. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't trip over myself.
No.
So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Other questions? Quiet today.
Everybody's search is going so well, you have no questions.
I had a question from somebody offline on this call. I won't name names, but I think it's a good generic question having to do with what do you do when you receive an offer? And do you accept the job on the spot? Like, what's the protocol for that? And here's the general rule of thumb, okay? You do not need to accept the job on the spot, okay? You can take a minute to think about it. In fact, unless the employer says to you, hey, this offer is firm and final, like we're offering you 100 grand and that's it, no negotiation. Unless they say that, they're typically expecting you to negotiate one time, which means you would go offline, think about it, right, and come back. So what do you do, right? So you say to the employer, oh, thank you, blah, 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 right? Very, very flattered. And then you can say, look, I'd like to put some pen to paper. Now, of course, to do that, you need to make sure you have all the benefits. And I don't just mean the generic benefit summary sheet. I mean like the cost, what's called cost share, right? So how much are you paying out of pocket for medical? What's the 401k match? Right? Make sure that you get, if they haven't already sent it to you, ask for it on that spot, on that call. Say, look, I really want to do a cost comparison between what you're offering and what I've had in the past. Take a minute to think about it and be thoughtful. Like employers actually like when you're being thoughtful about something. So that's good. So how long should you take? That really depends. The quicker you can say yes, the more you're expressing your interest in the job. Okay. Technically, you can take up to a week. I do not recommend that because from the employer's perspective, they call that a slow no, number one. And number two, it makes them think that you don't really want the job. It makes them think that you're trying to, compare it to something else and try to leverage it. It's just not that, you can do it. I don't recommend it, right? It just doesn't start you out on the right foot. So if you can make the decision within 24 hours, great. If you can, go back to them in 24 hours and say, look, I've been thinking about it. Thank you so much. And, I'd like to propose a slightly different compensation structure based on X, Y, and Z. Now, that also depends on what kind of conversation you've had up until that point, right? If they've asked you about comp, which they should have, if they're smart, or like not ask you about it, meaning they're not supposed to ask you what your compensation is, your salary history was, but they could bring it up and upfront, and they could say, look, our range is X to Y. If they're smart, they'll only say one number so that you don't feel lowballed. But regardless of what it is, you have to think about what's been your conversation to date, right? So if you indicated to them when they said, we're looking at a salary range of 100 to 120, and you go, okay, right? And you didn't say anything else about it, then their thinking is, well, great, they'll accept 100 or whatever it is. You just have to think back to what your previous conversation was, and that'll help you to determine, look, you had said 1 to 120, they offer you 100, and you say, look, thank you for that. The reality is, after thinking about this opportunity, after thinking about my experience with the role, the scope, all of this, the market, I was really looking for something closer to that 120 range. Is there anything we can do to lift the compensation closer to that amount? So they're not going to come in back at 110, but they might do like 105. You know what I mean? Like they might do something, because that's just the way we negotiate in this country. Most people kind of look for the split the difference. But when the employer feels like they have a little bit more power, in the situation, they won't go necessarily in the middle, but they'll try to do something to show that they're not trying to be belligerent, again, unless they've actually said in the beginning, the offer is firm and final. So that's a little bit of a tip.
Yeah. And to add to that, I mean, from a candidate's perspective, as Shira just said, you take the time and you go back and you say, can you do this? They're either going to say yes or no, right? You have nothing to lose, in that sense. I mean, go ahead and negotiate. And
Right.
And,
If they
and,
come
the-
back
and
and they're
the
like,
example
no.
Shira just said, if you accepted 100,000, you just lost 5,000, right?
Try. And if they can't do the money, then negotiate something else, an extra week of vacation. Maybe there's something about the benefits you can do. I mean, there's different things, different ways to slice and dice, but try something, because your best time to negotiate is when you get the offer. Once you get the job, you typically get COLA increases, 2 to 4%, unless you get a promotion. So it's really important to negotiate strong upfront.
Yeah.
Sure.
And think about it from the employer's perspective. The employer spent lots of time going through this whole recruiting process. They've interviewed tons of people.
I wanna
And
lose you.
you were the one that they selected, right?
That's right.
So this is where you, as Shira said, this is where you have leverage. They've selected you out of all of this time and effort they've put into this recruiting process. And so they'd like not to lose their number one candidate,
That's right. You're in a better negotiating position than you think. Dan?
Sure. Does that really apply if at the very outset of this process, the executive search person gave me a specific number, not a range, and basically was saying, I just wanted to make sure this is going to be roughly in your ballpark. I can't remember if it was actually in the initial required, like in the cover letter, if I had to list my requirements or anything, but she gave me a specific, the executive search recruiter in the screening interview said, listen, I wanted to run this number by you. Is this going to work for you?
Yeah.
And so I imagine I have much less leverage given that. I mean, I did say, it's a little low. In theory, it's a little less than I was hoping for, but I really want to work for you guys. So essentially,
Sure. You do have less negotiation in a case like that. What I would say, I'm making up a number. Okay. So let's say it was like 125. Okay. They said, okay, can you do 125? And you're like, nah, but you're still moving forward. Right. And they come back and say, okay, salary offer is 125. Basically you said you'd be okay with that. And then you can say, look, as I mentioned, when we first had this conversation, yes, that is absolutely something I would consider. In light of my experience and all of that, is there anything we can do to lift the comp slightly? Is there any? It's just a question. You're not being belligerent, no ultimatum. You're saying, I respect that you shared this with me up front. Is there anything we can do? That's it. And if they say no. But who knows? Maybe $5,000 extra is in the offing. I have no idea.
and then
If I can just, I'm sorry, if I can just follow up on on that. You know, I had a similar situation where a recruiter asked me like 3 times, or said to me, I don't think they can afford you. And I didn't say, well, let me make that determination, but I made it very clear that I was interested in the job and I just wanted to go forward. Now, ultimately what happened was I had 2 interviews, and I don't even know if they hired a person because, as usual, they didn't follow up with me. I was essentially ghosted out. So I'm kind of left to wonder if they just felt like I was too expensive or something else. And it was, it was very frustrating. And I don't know what else I could have done there, because I made it exceedingly clear that, I'm not really working right now. So frankly, anything is an improvement from 0. Although I don't want to sell myself short.
Understand, Craig, that and first of all, I have no idea why they ghosted you, but if it was comp related, who knows? Understand that the employer is playing the long game and you're playing the short game, in the sense that what you're feeling is very normal. Anything's better than 0, but they fully appreciate the emotion around this, the psychology, if you will. Once you get the job, the generic Greg, okay, anybody, once you get the job, and the benefits start rolling in and the paycheck starts rolling in, all of a sudden, if you're like a normal person, you will likely think, oh, well, actually, this really is a lot less than what I used to be making. And then you might have buyer's remorse. And if you have buyer's remorse, then within 3 to 6 months, you might be knocking down that employer's door and saying, well, what can we do to, that is the most normal. Sonya's shaking her head. She's probably seen this in HR. This is a very normal phenomenon. And so most employers, in trying to mitigate their risk, really don't want to hire people who are taking a significant pay cut. Now, in the pay equity rules, right, you can't let regulations, they can't ask you what you were making, so they don't know, but they're assuming based on your level that you're going to be needing more, in which case they're going to be very, very reluctant to hire you unless you make it super abundantly clear that the reason that you're looking for something less has nothing to do with the fact that you're unemployed. If you're just at a different stage in life and career, and you're like, look, I don't need, not want, but I don't need that level of comp anymore. I'm just in a different place. That's not what's important to me now. What's important is the opportunity. I'll give you an example. I'm as we speak, I'm dealing with this right now. Yesterday, I interviewed somebody, and this is how it went. So this is a nonprofit. It's actually a pro bono type number. It's not an association, it's like a nonprofit, okay, direct service, all that. Their comp is that small, okay? So I presented this opportunity to this candidate, and I'm like, look, the salary is only X, okay? I'll just say what it was 90, all right? Which for this level role was like way lower than what could be. They have a little extra incentive, but basically it's about 90. And so I interviewed the guy yesterday because he had said to me, well, look, it is less than what I'm making. Of course, I wouldn't ask him what he's making, but he said it's less than what I'm making. But when we talked, here's what he said. He says, look, Shira, he goes, my reason for accepting something lower, in fact, he says, I've already talked with my wife about this, is because of the mission. He says, I can't do that kind of mission in my current opportunity. This guy is like ridiculous mission. I mean, like social justice that kind of person, right? And he's like, look, this particular organization that you're presenting to me is spot on. He says, I am willing to take that pay cut, not because he's unemployed, nothing like that. It's literally because he understands in that kind of world, you just don't get the same comp, and he's willing to tighten a belt buckle because of the mission. That was totally legit. And I think the employer is going to be totally fine with that. Right. But there has to be a legitimate reason where we don't think that he's going to come back in 6 months and say, oh, I need more money. No, he made an intentional decision because this is a group that just doesn't pay. And he's okay with that because he's, a social justice kind of person. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I ultimately was never asked about a salary figure. But again, I just wish I would have had an opportunity to even understand why the process stopped, at least for me, because I don't even think they hired anyone, to be honest with you. But, that was, I think, 7 months ago now. So, I've obviously had to move on. But it's just, it left a bad taste in my mouth just when the recruiter kept asking me or kept saying, well, they're afraid that you're too expensive for them.
Yeah, but
You
can you
know.
understand now from their perspective why that would be a big concern?
Excuse me?
Can you understand now a little bit better what, from their perspective, why they would be concerned about that?
I mean, I can understand that. I mean, if you looked at my resume, I can sort of get it was a nonprofit. But again, if you're that concerned, then give me a number for me to say I can accept that or I
Well,
can't.
so that's the issue, right? So this is what employers are grappling with right now. Historically, employers always held salary close to their chest because they always wanted to be in the power position. I'm just being straight about that, okay? They don't want to give the numbers away so that the candidate can't say, oh, you're lowballing me. You said 1 to 120 and you didn't give me 120, and so I feel upset about that. Okay, so employers have typically held their cards to the chest. With the pay equity laws in place now, it's starting to shift. Recruiters like me, and this is really in the last, I'm telling you, last year and a half, I mean, it's very recent. People like me are now starting to push the employer to do what you're asking, to say, look, we can't ask about salary history, nor should we be asking what the candidate wants, because that's usually relative to what they made. We need to come up with the goods. Okay, so in my case, I usually try to make my employers pull one number, a number that they won't go below, but that they could go above. I've seen recently, I saw a posting where they did the range, so there's different ways to do it, but it's a shift right now in mindset with employers. They're just not used to this idea of like present them, unless you're the government, then they have to, but otherwise it's not commonplace.
Yeah.
Oh, and before you go on, Deborah has had her hand raised for a while.
Okay.
So I've got a question for you guys, and it's related to negotiation with an employer, because I'm talking to an employer right now, and the question came up about returning to the office, and they sent me their manual pre-COVID, which the policy was, after 6 months of working on site, you can work from home 1 day a week. And so I asked them about that. My HR person, she said, yeah, we're working on this. We know we have to change this because the reality is people are starting here remote, and we can't really say come back to the office 5 days a week, but we still haven't figured it out. So in my head, I'm like, if I get an offer, for me, I would want to try to have it a hybrid model, like where I could go in a couple of days of work from home. So I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I negotiate that? Like they still maybe figuring this out. And then I was thinking about this because I'm like, I'm sure I'm not the only person who's kind of in the space right now where companies are like trying to figure it out and getting that question of like, trying to figure out as you accept an offer. I'm not someone, I talked to one job seeker I know who, she says, I will not, if someone calls me and says the job's not remote, I won't even talk to the recruiter. I'm in a place right now, that's what I want. I'm not that there, but I would like to have a hybrid model. So I'm just not really sure how, if I get a job offer, kind of the best way to deal with that.
So I would address it up front. Deborah, this is the most normal thing in the world right now. Most every employer that I know of is actually implementing that very thing, where they're saying we can no longer force people to come in 5 days a week. So we are working toward some sort of flex schedule where it's not flex schedule, partial remote opportunity where people can come in, work from home a couple days a week, maybe 3, but usually 2. So what you're asking is actually what their own employees are asking. It's not just you; they're all asking that, and it's it's just the most common thing right now. So you're not going to seem out of whack at all by asking for that, but I would address it up front before you get the offer. So look, this would be very important to me. And I'd like to know if we can, if you do move forward with me, if we can look at a 2-day-a-week remote situation. Nothing wrong with that. Right now, there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you.
They may come back though, Deborah, and because you already said they're mulling it over and they're trying to think about what's best for the organization. And so, if they said, okay, Deborah, we'll commit, you can have 2 days a week at home, but then at the end of the discussions within the corporation, the CEO says, no, I only want 1 day a week for people, so those things could be going on. So I just.
Depends on how important it is to you. If it's a requirement, say it that way. If it's a preference, say it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, Rick, did you have something to say about earlier, and then we'll go to Scott?
Yeah, I wanted to get back with Craig, and just because every recruiter is different. So when I'm doing a search, one of the first thing I do is with the money is I find out from the project manager if there's any wiggle room in the salary, because I want to know what they're thinking. So I don't rule people out that, may be a fit. Then the second thing that I do is then I go to people that I think are overqualified. Like, say, if I came to you, I try to get more information from them, number one, because my belief is everyone is in a different place in life and there may be situations. But when I see someone that I think is definitely over the salary range, I'll contact them and I'll ask them, this is the range up front, because I don't want to waste a lot of time, theirs or mine. And I say, is this something that you could work with? If they say yes, then I'll have a follow-up conversation with them, because I want to know what their circumstances so I can sell that to the project manager. So in recent case, I had to find a senior level CPIC person. And I found this guy, and he was overqualified, but I also noticed that he worked for the government for 30 years and I thought he's probably retired. And so I approached him and said, hey, just seeing if this might be interest to you, or if you have referrals of people that may have worked for you. And so we had the conversation. Then he said, look, I'm retired. My wife just wants me to get out of the house. I'd love to, do that. And no big deal. The salary, it doesn't matter because I have a pension. So my point is that it depends on the recruiter. So to me, a recruiter would search most alternatives. And if I see someone, I don't search every person, but if I see someone that would be a good fit, even they're over the range, I'll at least up front send them the range and just say, hey, every circumstance is different. Is this something that we could discuss further? So not every recruiter does it the same way, but that's how I do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then so I'd go back to, when Carolyn had her first question about retained search and contingency search. And I said there's professionals and there's unprofessionals. And so here's an example. I mean, Rick's, giving you an example of someone who's doing the best job he can to get the best qualified candidate for, his client. And he's approaching it in a way that's pretty open and it's non-biased. And whereas, the bias is so strong for people who are overqualified or over what the range that the company's looking for, that bias, and Shira said it a million times, they're trying to minimize risk. And so as a job seeker, it drives you right up the wall, but that's the reality of the situation. It's just such a strong bias.
And
kudos to Rick for not falling into that bias.
Well, and it's also my job to go back to the project manager and sell to him or her why this is a good candidate, even though they're overqualified. And I hired that CPIC person who was a core and was overqualified because I convinced the project manager, look, this is this guy's situation. This is what he's looking for. So recruiters should go back to the project manager and be able to sell why this person's a good fit for this job.
That's right. And by the way, there is a slight psychological difference between whether you've applied for the role or they have hunted you down. In other words, who's in the driver's seat, right? And there is. It's just human nature. That's a relationship thing. If they have literally recruited you, you are the person that they want. You are in a much better position to get what you need. Frankly, that's just negotiation, right? There's a seesaw in terms of that. But if you're running after them, then they feel like they have a little bit more, leverage. So just kind of what it is. Scott.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Two questions, and the first one's probably the simplest. But on a lot of these websites and a lot of the jobs that you apply for, they ask, what is your desired compensation, your desired salary? Do you leave it blank? Do you put something in there? Do you?
Yeah, so that's going to be changing and probably in coming months and years. You know, that's kind of legacy in those applications. It's a very common question. So don't leave it blank, because then they think you're going to be cagey. I mean, so or I should say, it's best if you don't leave it blank. Okay. You want to come up with a number, and it's tricky. I get it. There's not a science to this. It's an art, where you look at the market, you look at, go to Glassdoor, go to salary.com, you know, look at compensation structures the best that you can, and try to get a sense as to what you think would be the kind of the high end comfortable number, right? Again, it's like when I do this with my coaching clients, we really have a deep conversation. I mean, it's not an easy thing. So that's why I get the question. I really do. It's not easy. But to the extent that you can come up with a number that you think is on the high end, but not out of range, then I would put that number down. And you can also, if there's a space to write anything like anywhere else, like a longer, you know, long form, you can use this expression that I typically use, which is, I'm seeking a total cash compensation package in the blank range, but you don't use range as you don't put two numbers in there, you still put the one number. So I'm seeking a total cash comp package in the 125 range. That means total cash comp means if that number that you put in is above what they would offer, you know, their number, then at least gives a little bit of wiggle room. Okay. But at the end of the day, if you're putting in a number that's $50,000 off, it's not your job.
Sure. When you say that in the range and then you give one number, so I'm confused.
That's okay.
What are you saying? Okay.
I'm saying is,
because they're going to offer us one number for our salary. They said, we're going to make you an offer of, you know, 100K. But if you say in the range of,
I'll explain because I get this question a lot. I'm using the term range in the colloquial sense of in that general direction. That's how I'm using the phrase. Okay. So, it's like, if you were to just say, if forget that this is necessarily a salary negotiation, if you were just having a colloquial conversation with someone and they'll say, well, what are you looking for? Well, I'm kind of looking in this general range. That's the way I'm using the phrase. That general range, not a range of two numbers. It's just in that direction. Okay. So you could rephrase it and you could say, I'm seeking a total cash compensation package around, that's the other way you could say it, around 125. That's the other way to do it. Okay. And that saves any kind of, you know, misunderstanding. But the point is that you're giving one number, not two numbers. When you give two numbers, they give you the lowest one. So you can just say in the general direction of, or generally around 125. Does that help?
I give two numbers, and I'm gonna tell you why. I give two numbers because I know the minimum I must have. The worst thing you can do is take a job and the salary is beneath what you need to bring home, because you'll be going to the savings account every payday trying to make up, and you will start hating that job every payday. So I give two numbers, the medium, and then where the highest that I think they will go. And I figure that they're gonna talk to me. I don't think they're gonna, well, so far for me, no one is gone at my lowest number. It could be because I'm in HR and they know, okay, she knows. So that could be what's going on. I don't know. But I'm just saying, I'm afraid of one number. I'm not telling people don't do that.
I hear you. This is why I always encourage people to do the one number thing, because of exactly what you're saying, Sonia. I don't want fear to drive your negotiations. The best time to negotiate is up front. And the law of negotiation is you can always negotiate down. You can't negotiate up.
Right. I
So
agree.
the one number thing does this. It says, psychologically, you're not saying it this way, but you're saying, this is the number that I'm seeking. It's my ideal. It's kind of like buying and selling a house. You don't give a range when you're trying to sell your house. The number we want is X. Okay. Somebody's going to, well, not in this market, but in other markets, people will try to negotiate down. the seller understands that. Like, that's just perfectly normal. The seller will never say, the range of our house is 500 to 600. Well, of course, that's silly, no, right? You're smiling because no one does that. So
Right.
we think that that's appropriate in salary negotiations. It's exactly the same model. So all I'm suggesting is take a little bit of a risk. Because here's the thing, if your number is within their sphere, they will actually say to you, okay, you just said 125. And the reality is, look, 110s kind of are really what we can do. Do you have any flexibility? You can negotiate down. But if you say 110 to 125, fine, maybe they give you 115, but they're not giving you 125. They will do their
I
best.
agree with
They're
that.
in HR. They're going to get good.
Yeah. They're not going to give you the high number.
No, they're going to get away with whatever they can because that's their fiscal responsibility. So you start high, and if your high number is like $50,000 off, again, it's not your job anyway.
Right.
I recommend take a little bit of a risk, go with the one number and go down, but don't give the two because they're not going to give you your
Okay.
utility.
I'm gonna try that, Shira.
All right.
And then I'll be back.
There you go. All right. Scott, was your
My second question was, so I was approached by a recruiter back end of last year for a contracting job with the federal government. I sent in all my information, I interviewed, I received the offer letter, I accepted the offer letter. They submitted my resume to the federal agency. The federal agency accepted my resume. They were able to get the contract, all that good stuff. When I submitted for the security clearance, I was not granted the interim security clearance, and they were saying it could take up to 6 months. I got a call back from the program manager, and he said, hey, look, we're not going to be able to wait 6 months to bring you on board. And I said, well, they said up to 6 months. He said, yeah, I don't know what they want to do, but right now we're going to move forward. And I haven't heard anything else back from them. So I don't know, am I still out there in limbo land with that organization? I mean, I signed a letter saying I was accepting the position. They sent me all the stuff. They actually had me upload my photo onto their corporate website and listed me. They set up my direct deposit, but I never, of course, got any pay. Do I still legally, technically belong to them? Do I need to resign from them? Should they have terminated me? Are they just using me to get their contract? And now that they've got the contract, I'll never hear from them again.
Rick, that's your world.
That's a bunch of questions, Scott. But I understand what you're saying. I can tell you that sometimes business decisions are made based on people getting interim clearances. Our contracts, our offers that we send out are always contingent on passing the security clearance. And sometimes that the timing, because the interim clearances are taking an extremely long period of time. I mean, we just had this last week. We had someone, a lady, very qualified for a position that required a secret clearance. She didn't have it. So they started her in the interim secret, but the offer that she signed basically says, if the position's open at the time that your clearance comes through, that's a caveat in it. So and then they told us to start looking for someone with an active clearance. So my answer to you is that's probably what they were doing. I don't know what their offer letter says in it, but there are some issues, and they need to rescind your offer if that's the case, if that's what they're doing. But there's just a lot of things that I can't really tell. But I would say that they're moving on to someone with an active clearance out of necessity for the contract being awarded and moving forward. It's just my guess from what you've said.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to figure out if I was like I said, if I'm going to get a phone call from them 3 months down the road that says, oh yeah, we finally got your clearance in, start working, or whether I'll never hear from them again and they just basically terminated the agreement, but they never notified.
Well, it doesn't hurt to ask. I mean, I wouldn't stay unsure. I mean, you can be respectful and just say, look, you know, I was given an offer. Just want to be clear on where we are in the process. And I mean, an ethical company would tell you at least,
Right.
look, the clearance is going to take.
Great to ask employers these kinds of questions in general, right? If it has to do with your status, your anything like that, it's okay, you know, as long as you're
Yeah,
not.
especially since you have a
Call them
signed
every
off.
day, but you know, it's fine. It's fine.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Let's just wrap up with Dan's question.
Yeah, hi, Shira. I just wanted to follow up on something you'd raised earlier about with the benefits and what language specifically should you use in terms of asking for this cost comparison? You said to sort of get into detail in terms of
Yeah. So
much
all you would say, all you'd say is, can you share with me a summary of your benefits, including the medical cost share?
and everybody, including nonprofits, will do that medical cost share. Yeah.
Medical cost share. Yeah, exactly. How much do I pay for benefits? That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
They may not have it on their generic form, but they have it somewhere.
Yeah.
If you want to get that one.
Okay, thank you.
And they should have a benefit summary and give you some idea of if there's a 401k or whatever, what the match is. Because again, if you're going from a organization there where there's a 2% match and now you're going to an organization with a 5% match, well, that's not money that you'll have in your paycheck. That is, as Shira said, that's total compensation. That's real money.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up for today. And Rick, actually, so we're going to transition into a prayer call for those who want to stay on the call. Typically, Rick has been on that call, and he often will share a scripture. I used to share a scripture verse when I was using the PowerPoint a number of weeks ago. But Rick, do you have a verse that you would like to share with the group just as a word of encouragement before we transition? Oh, you're on mute, Rick.
Sorry about that. I will share the verse I shared a couple weeks ago about the purpose of trials and to put everything in perspective. And the verses is Genesis 22:1 and 22:2. And it's about Abraham and Isaac. And it says, it came to pass after these things that God did test Abraham and said, Abraham, here I am. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. And I read that along with these reasons for trials, and it put it in faith. It allows us to self-examine the strength or the weaknesses of our faith. Trials come to humble us, to rely on God. Trials come to wean us from worldly things. Trials set our affections on the things above. Trials place God number one in your heart. Trials teach us the value of obedience. Trials come to enable us to help others who are suffering, and trials help us to develop an enduring strength. And I can say that because I was unemployed for 14 months, and I know the emotions and the feelings that you go through, and we're not alone. And there is definitely a purpose, and I can attest to that as a witness, that there is a purpose. And even some of those things are things that you may not realize until after you're through the trial.
Amen. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that. Well, so that's a good lead in. So we're going to wrap up the formal portion of our call right now. So if anyone would like to stay on for a short prayer call, you're certainly welcome to do that. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you guys next Friday.
Thanks, Shira.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Okay. All right. So hold on a second. Let's go ahead and stop recording.